Marcus Thompson stepped out of his luxury taxi at Buckingham Palace, adjusting his expensive designer sunglasses and smoothing his tailored suit. The wealthy American businessman had flown to London specifically to show off his success on social media. His phone was already recording as he approached the famous gates, talking loudly to his followers about how he was about to make the boring British guards dance for his entertainment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as tourists gathered to watch the changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus pushed through the crowd, using his elbows to claim a prime spot right at the front barrier. Several families with children were forced to step aside as he muscled his way forward, completely ignoring their protests. "Excuse me, sir. You're pushing my daughter," said a polite British father holding his young girl's hand. Marcus barely glanced at them. "Money talks, buddy. I paid good cash to be here first." He waved his expensive watch in the air. "This Rolex cost more than most people make in a year." The other tourists exchanged uncomfortable looks as Marcus continued his loud bragging. He pulled out his phone and started live streaming, telling his followers how he was going to show these toy soldiers what real entertainment looks like. His voice carried across the courtyard, drawing annoyed stares from visitors who had come to respectfully witness the traditional ceremony. Standing perfectly still at his post was Guardsman James Mitchell, a decorated soldier who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Queen's Guard. His red tunic was immaculate, his bearskin hat perfectly positioned and his rifle held with military precision. He had been standing motionless for over an hour, as was his duty, but his trained eyes had already noticed the disruptive American tourist. James had dealt with difficult visitors before, but something about this man's aggressive behavior and complete disrespect for others set off alarm bells in his military mind. Through his peripheral vision, he could see Marcus getting closer to the rope barrier, his phone camera pointed directly at the guards. "Look at this guy," Marcus announced to his live stream audience, zooming his camera in on James's face. "Probably makes minimum wage to stand there like a statue. Watch me make him break character." The comment section of his live video filled with laughing emojis and encouraging messages from his followers, feeding his ego even more. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, fanning the bills out like a poker player, showing a winning hand. Several tourists gasped as they realized what he was planning to do. The respectful atmosphere that had surrounded the ceremony quickly turned tense as people began to understand that this wealthy American was about to cause a serious disruption. "Time for some fun," Marcus whispered to his camera, his eyes gleaming with mischief as he prepared to cross a line that would change everything. Marcus stepped over the rope barrier with a cocky grin, completely ignoring the clear signs that warned visitors to keep their distance from the royal guards. His designer shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he approached Guardsman Mitchell, holding his phone up high to capture every moment for his social media followers. "Hey there, toy soldier," Marcus called out loudly, waving the cash in front of James's face. "I've got £500 here that says you can't keep that serious face when I do this." Without warning, he started making ridiculous faces and dancing around the motionless guard, his expensive suit jacket flapping as he moved. The crowd of tourists watched in stunned silence as Marcus began poking the air near James's face, trying to get any kind of reaction. "Come on, buddy. Nobody's paying you enough to ignore this kind of money." He held the bills just inches from the guard's nose, rustling them loudly while continuing his childish antics. James remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead as he had been trained to do, but inside, his military discipline was being tested like never before. He could smell the expensive cologne wafting from the arrogant tourist and hear every insulting word, but his years of service had taught him the importance of maintaining his post no matter what distractions came his way. "This is embarrassing," whispered an elderly British woman to her husband. "Someone should stop this nonsense." Marcus overheard her comment and spun around, his face flushed with anger. "Mind your own business, lady. I'm just having some fun with government property here." He turned back to James and raised his voice even louder. "Isn't that right, tin soldier? You're just a fancy decoration, aren't you?" The situation escalated when Marcus decided that verbal harassment wasn't enough. He reached out and flicked the guard's bearskin hat, causing it to shift slightly on James's head. The crowd gasped collectively, understanding that the tourist had just committed a serious breach of protocol that could have legal consequences. "There, we go!" Marcus laughed triumphantly, holding his phone higher to capture the hat's movement. "I got him to move, see that, everyone? These so-called elite guards are nothing special." His live-stream chat exploded with mixed reactions, some cheering him on while others began criticizing his disrespectful behavior. But James still didn't react. His hat had been disturbed, but he continued staring straight ahead with the same professional composure he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. This only frustrated Marcus more, who had expected his provocations to result in some kind of dramatic response that would make great content for his social media accounts. "Fine. You want to play statue?" Marcus snarled, his voice taking on a darker tone. "Let's see how long you can keep this up." He moved even closer, now standing directly in front of the guard with his face just inches away from James's chin, breathing heavily from excitement and anger as he prepared to take his harassment to the next level. Marcus's behavior reached a new low as he began shouting directly into James's face, his spittle landing on the guard's perfectly polished buttons. "I said dance, you pathetic excuse for a soldier." He started jumping around like a deranged monkey, making loud noises and gestures that would have been embarrassing for a child, let alone a grown businessman. The tourist crowd had grown larger as word spread about the American causing chaos at the palace. Many people were now recording the incident with their own phones, but unlike Marcus's followers, they were documenting his shameful behavior as evidence rather than entertainment. Children in the crowd looked frightened by the aggressive man's actions, clinging to their parents' legs. "Sir, you need to step back immediately," called out a palace security officer who had been alerted to the situation, but Marcus was too caught up in his performance to pay attention to any warnings. "Not until this fake soldier admits he's just a tourist attraction," Marcus screamed, his face now red with rage. In his twisted mind, the guard's continued silence was a personal insult to his wealth and status. He had never been ignored by anyone in his business dealings, and James's professional discipline was driving him to increasingly desperate measures. That's when Marcus made his biggest mistake. Fueled by anger and the cheers from some of his online followers, he reached out and grabbed James's rifle, trying to pull it away from the guard's hands. "Let's see what happens when I take your toy gun away." The moment Marcus's hands touched the weapon, everything changed. James had been trained for exactly this scenario, and his military instincts kicked in immediately. The seemingly motionless guard suddenly came to life with lightning-fast precision, his body moving with the fluid efficiency of a combat-trained soldier. In one smooth motion, James stepped back, secured his rifle, and assumed a defensive stance. His voice boomed across the courtyard with commanding authority that made even the loudest tourists fall silent. "Step back and do not touch the weapon." The transformation from statue-like guard to alert soldier was so dramatic that Marcus stumbled, backward in shock, but the damage was already done. By attempting to take the rifle, Marcus had crossed from simple harassment into a serious criminal offense. Palace security officers were now running toward the scene from multiple directions, their radios crackling with urgent communications. The tourist, who had thought he was just having some fun with a toy soldier, was about to discover that he had just committed what British law considered an attack on the crown. Marcus's phone slipped from his suddenly sweaty hands, clattering, to the ground and continuing to livestream as his confident expression melted into one of growing panic. The crowd that had been watching his performance now formed a tight circle around him, but their faces showed disgust rather than admiration. He was no longer the star of his own show. He had become the villain in a very real drama that was about to have serious consequences. The palace security team surrounded Marcus within seconds, their professional training evident in how quickly and efficiently they contained the situation. Lead security officer Sarah Chen stepped forward, her badge clearly visible as she addressed the panicking tourist with calm but firm authority. "Sir, you are being detained for assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard and interference with official duties," Officer Chen announced clearly, making sure her words were audible to the crowd and the still recording phones around them. Marcus's arrogant demeanor crumbled instantly. Wait, "This is just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice shaking as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "I'm an American citizen. I have rights. I was just playing around." "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Chen continued, completely unfazed by his protests. "You have the right to legal representation. Anything you say may be used as evidence against you in court." The crowd watched in fascination as Marcus was handcuffed, his expensive designer jacket now wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled. The same tourists he had pushed aside earlier were now taking photos of his arrest, their expressions showing a mix of satisfaction and disbelief at how quickly his arrogance had led to his downfall. "This can't be happening," Marcus whimpered, as the officers began leading him away. "Do you know who I am? I own 3 companies. I donate to political campaigns. I can't go to jail over something this stupid." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The security team had dealt with entitled individuals before, and Marcus's wealth and status meant nothing in the face of British law. As they walked him toward the police van, his expensive shoes scraped against the cobblestones, producing a pathetic sound that matched his deflated ego. Meanwhile, Guardsman James had returned to his post with the same professional composure he had maintained throughout the entire incident. To the amazement of the watching crowd, he stood at attention as if nothing had happened, his rifle properly positioned, and his eyes focused straight ahead. The only sign of the recent confrontation was his slightly adjusted bearskin hat, which another guard quietly straightened during a brief moment when tourists weren't looking. "That soldier has incredible discipline," murmured an Australian tourist to her companion. "I can't believe he stayed so calm while that maniac was attacking him." The crowd began to disperse, but many tourists remained to show their respect for the guards, taking proper photos from behind the barriers and thanking the officers for their service. The atmosphere around the palace had completely changed from the tense drama of Marcus's harassment to one of renewed appreciation for the professionalism of the Royal Guard. As the police van drove away with Marcus inside, his social media livestream was still running from his dropped phone on the ground, capturing the reactions of disgusted tourists and the sound of approaching sirens. His online followers were witnessing the complete destruction of his reputation in real time, and the comment section had turned from supportive to brutally critical of his behavior. At the Metropolitan Police Station, Marcus sat in a cold holding cell, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained from his struggle with the officers. The reality of his situation was finally beginning to penetrate his ego-driven mind. His one phone call had gone to his lawyer back in New York, who had delivered devastating news about the seriousness of his charges. "Marcus, you're looking at potential assault charges, harassment, and interference with official duties," his attorney had explained over the crackling international connection. In Britain, attacking a member of the Royal Guard is considered an offense against the Crown itself. This isn't some minor tourist incident. You could face serious jail time. The businessman who had strutted confidently through Buckingham Palace just hours earlier now sat with his head in his hands, realizing that his moment of viral fame might cost him everything. His social media accounts were exploding with negative attention as the video of his arrest spread across the internet, shared by thousands of people who were disgusted by his behavior. Meanwhile, the story was making headlines in both British and American news outlets. "American tourist arrested after attacking Royal Guard" dominated the evening news, with reporters standing outside Buckingham Palace describing the incident in detail. Marcus's business partners in New York were already fielding angry calls from clients who had seen the viral video and wanted to distance themselves from his companies. Back at the palace, Guardsman James Mitchell was finally relieved from his duty as the sun began to set over London. As he walked to the guardhouse to change out of his ceremonial uniform, his fellow soldiers congratulated him on his professional handling of the difficult situation. "That was textbook discipline, James," said Sergeant Williams, patting him on the shoulder. "Command is already talking about recommending you for a commendation. The way you handled that lunatic tourist was exactly how we're trained to respond." James smiled modestly as he hung up his red tunic. "Just doing my job, sir. Though I have to admit, that was one of the strangest incidents I've dealt with since joining the Guard." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed it. Marcus had come to London expecting to humiliate a toy soldier for social media entertainment, but instead had encountered a highly trained military professional who had served his country with honor in some of the world's most dangerous combat zones. The boring British Guard he had mocked was actually a decorated veteran who had earned multiple medals for bravery under fire. As news of Marcus's background began to emerge, reporters discovered that his wealth came largely from inheritance, rather than business skill, and that several of his companies were already struggling financially. His arrest in London was becoming the final nail in the coffin of his already crumbling business empire, as investors and partners began abandoning ship to protect their own reputations. The video of his meltdown and arrest continued to spread across social media platforms, but now it served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of arrogance and disrespect, rather than the entertainment content he had originally intended to create. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood before a British magistrate in Westminster Magistrates' Court, looking nothing like the confident businessman who had arrived in London with such arrogance. His expensive suit had been replaced with a simple outfit, provided by his British legal aid attorney, since his American lawyer had refused to continue representing him after the case became a public relations nightmare. "Mr. Thompson," the magistrate began, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the case file, "you have pleaded guilty to assault, harassment, and interference with official royal duties. These are serious offenses that show complete disrespect for British law and tradition." Marcus's social media empire had completely collapsed in the weeks following his arrest. The viral video of his meltdown had been viewed over 50 million times, but instead of making him famous as he had hoped, it had turned him into an international symbol of entitled tourist behavior. Companies around the world were using his story and training materials about cultural sensitivity and respect. "I understand the severity of my actions, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible in the courtroom. "I want to apologize to Guardsman Mitchell, to the royal family, and to the British people for my inexcusable behavior." The magistrate nodded and continued reading his sentence. "You will serve 6 months in Her Majesty's prison, followed by 2 years of probation during which you are banned from entering any royal property or government building in the United Kingdom. Additionally, you will pay a fine of £10,000 and complete 200 hours of community service upon your return to the United States." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, photographers captured images that would become the final chapter of his viral story. The man who had tried to humiliate a royal guard for internet fame was now facing the ultimate humiliation himself, broadcast to the same global audience that had witnessed his original offense. Meanwhile, Guardsman James Mitchell had returned to his regular duties, largely unaffected by the incident that had destroyed another man's life. He continued to serve with the same quiet dignity and professional excellence that had defined his military career, earning respect from visitors who now approached the guards with much greater appreciation for their service. The family that Marcus had pushed aside during his original approach to the palace had since written a letter to the palace, praising the guards' professionalism and expressing their gratitude for the way the situation had been handled. Their young daughter had become fascinated by the guards' discipline and was now considering a career in the military herself. Marcus's companies had filed for bankruptcy, his social media accounts had been permanently suspended, and his former business associates had publicly distanced themselves from him. The £500 he had waved so arrogantly at the guard wouldn't even cover a single day of his legal fees, and his expensive Rolex had been sold to help pay for his defense. The story became a powerful reminder that respect, humility, and common decency are values that transcend wealth and status. Marcus had learned the hardest lesson of his privileged life, that treating others with dignity costs nothing, but the price of arrogance can be everything you hold dear. His moment of viral fame had indeed made him unforgettable, but for all the wrong reasons, serving as a warning to future tourists about the swift and severe consequences of disrespecting those who serve their country with honor.